Hello, welcome to Staring into the Abyss. With me, as always, is Matt Brandenburg.
Yeah, I just got this feeling of dancing to the beat of these bells. I mean, I just really want to dance.
Oh man, those bells are sounding really good. And do you hear those bells as well with our special guest, Daniel Braum, author of The Serpent Shadow?
Those bells are music to my ears. Nice to see you and hear you guys.
You too. I mean, they just have such a catchy beat. I can't help but just, want to dance.
And there's a strange
it's the sound of Robert Aickman rolling over in his grave is what it
is. Today we'll be discussing Ring of the Changes by Robert Aickman, which I haven't read Aickman in a while, and this just reminds me I need to read more Robert Aickman.
It's one of his best.
It's one of his best? Okay.
They're all one of his best, but some people, the person who introduced me to Robert Aickman when I asked him what his favorite one was expecting a different answer. He was like, "Oh, it's Ring of the Changes by far," and I had never read that one, you got spells coming.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into it, but I will say I've never read Aickman before. The book this is in, which I can't remember the name of off the top of my head, I see lots of places. I'm like, oh, it's a cool cover, and like I've heard of the name, I should pick it up, but never have. And then, so I appreciate that we did this one. But I'll say right off the bat, even before we talk about everything, I did not expect this to go the place it went. And maybe I was pleasantly surprised. We'll put it that way.
Before we dive into our discussion of our media and also Robert Aickman, Daniel Braum just has released a novella through Cemetery Dance called The Serpent Shadow. And would you like to tell our audience a little bit about this novella, Daniel?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning the book. Yeah, it's called The Serpent Shadow. It's from Cemetery Dance, and it's one of those horror books that kind of masquerades as one thing, and as you walk down the path a little bit, it sort of reveals itself to be something else. While it's really different in tone than one of my favorite movies, it operates maybe in the same way the movie It Follows operates, as in both books. One of my favorite movies, and there's a lot we can say about It Follows. But one of the things structurally why I'm mentioning it is, on the surface, it looks like a movie you've seen before. There are kids in peril, and we got to run from the bad guy. But it's not that movie. It doesn't. The tropes aren't played for straight in any ways. So The Serpent Shadow is one of those books that on the surface looks like, we've got kids trying to, have fun, not follow the rules, and it takes place in the 80s in Mexico. So we're like, oh, it's going to be one of those. But it is, it's got the setup like, oh, we've seen this, we know this, I'm about to yawn. But it's not one of those at all. It is a story about a supernatural war between the Mexican people and the Mayan people, and our young protagonist, an outsider, a New Yorker, is in this strange world, and he finds himself in the middle of things he doesn't, and possibly even we, the reader, don't even understand.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, no, I talked about this I think maybe last month on the podcast.
Yes.
In our media roundup. And I thought this is honestly one of the best books I've read this year. I was hooked on it the entire time. And it was, I was just trying to blow smoke. It's legitimately, I really, really enjoyed this book. But I was going to say, I know Aickman is one of your influences, but I'm curious, because I kind of got a T.E.D. Klein vibe from this novella a little bit. Would you say that's another influence of yours?
So it's cool. Thanks for mentioning both those names. It's really just an honor to be in the same sentence. The funny thing is this book was written before I had even read a single word of Robert Aickman, and I don't even think I knew who he was. And the same with T.E.D. Klein. I'm familiar with who T.E.D. Klein is now, and as I've been having some conversations this month, that is it wasn't an influence on me because I haven't read him, even though he's been on my radar as the editor of Twilight Zone magazine and a great writer. But I haven't read him yet. I have all his books on my shelf, but he's a joy that's ahead of me. But thank you for the kind use of in the same sentence as those two.
You're welcome. we're very humbling podcasts, if you can tell.
Yeah.
Our whole goal here is to just talk horror and have fun. But also, so you said you wrote this book before you ever read Aickman or Klein. So when was this book originally written?
It was drafted in the first draft of it. I drafted in 2015.
Oh wow!
And I believe it was the end of that year was when I first read my first Robert Aickman story.
So, like, did somebody say like, "Hey, you wrote this book? Read Aickman," or like, how did that?
Not even. No, the two are completely unrelated. And I was at a convention, and I was dragged to a Robert Aickman panel. And I'm not a big panel goer, even though there's some awesome panels out there. I'm kind of in the school of like, I've been to so many classes and so much school. I'd rather cut off my arm than hear a panel again, even on something that's a great subject. So I found myself at this panel. It was at a World Fantasy Con. And it was about Robert Aickman, and my con buddies were like, "Oh no, Aickman's a cool author. You should check it out." On the panel was so this is pretty much a defining moment of my life. One of the panelists was the great Peter Straub, and there was a bunch of panelists. Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough was another panelist, I believe. Michael, I'm gonna mangle his name. I think the moderator was Michael Durda of a critic of one of the newspapers, and they were talking about Robert Aickman. And Peter Straub gave this great little riff. He was like, "If you've never read Robert Aickman, I could tell you exactly. I could analyze. Here's a format for a Robert Aickman story using the story The Swords." And Rich and I said we weren't going to talk about the swords, but we'll talk just a little bit about the swords. And Peter Straub said, well, rather than get into it, Straub just challenged the audience. He said, leave this panel, go into the dealer's room, read a copy of The Swords, and be forever changed. And I'm like, wow, okay. Let's see if that's real or not. And as so often these things are not. But for me, it was a real epiphany. It was a real eye-opener. The story was everything Peter Straub said. It was operating in all these ways. And it just clicked for me. It was the right story and the right context at the time for me to really find my place and confidence, and that it's okay to write strange tales. It's okay to be intentionally ambiguous. It's okay to have that Twilight Zone aspect in fiction, because that's what I wanted to do. And there Robert Aickman was doing it. And suddenly the work that I'd been doing, it was a validation, a self-validation of it. So that was my long-winded introduction to Robert Aickman, and never looked back.
Did that influence the second draft?
If you look at, I think it probably did. I think it was less of an influence on the Serpent Shadow than it was on my fiction. All the fiction in my first book, The Night Marchers and Other Strange Tales, I revisited it now because it was we were working on that book story selection with my editor Norman Prentice from Cemetery Dance, and that was due to our conversations. That was why Norman suggested adding "and other strange tales" to the title, which was an homage to Robert Aickman, and he used strange stories or strange tales to describe his fiction. And in my books that came out and my writings that came out after, mostly the ones that are collected in Underworld Dreams from Lev Press, those were written. Those had to be influenced by Aickman, even in the fact of I was writing with either a conscious or subconscious confidence that writing that kind of story was okay. Whereas in the Night Marchers, it was much more instinctual and with much more not knowing if any of these stories would ever find a place, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
That makes sense. So what would you say the influences on the Serpent Shadow would be then?
It's hard. It's hard to say. You know, I think it's just the influences of more in general, perhaps a lot older. I'm not conscious. I'm not conscious of it, but the two writers who are huge influences on me as a reader, and the more I look at it and the more I think about it, are the authors Lucius Shepard and Tanith Lee. Those were two authors that I read as a teenager, and both of those authors delivered to me everything that I love about reading. So I had to have had, they had to have had influences on my writing.
One of my favorite books is actually Vascor, Son of Vascor by Tanith Lee.
Deep cut.
It's so good. I bought it in a used bookstore just because I had that pulpy sword and sorcery cover, and I'm like, oh, I need this book. And I know they renamed it later because Vascor, Son of Vascor is not a good name for a book.
No.
But it'll always be how I view that book.
Oh, I love the pulpy yellow spine Tanith Lee books in a bookstore with and even I've been collecting Tanith Lee books for 20, 30 years, and she's so prolific that there are still crazy ass titles and covers out there I've never seen before. That's part of the joy of Tanith Lee. She had to have 10 copies of herself and was just writing constantly and publishing. And each one, the thing is that, and none of them suck. You know, they're all mind-blowingly different and weird.
Yeah, she's honestly an incredible writer. Every time I read her stuff, Oh, what, Daniel?
Oh, no, we were talking over it. Go. Every time you read her stuff.
I'm just blown away by her prose.
Yeah, we can actually say, Vascor, Son of Vascor is a rocking book with a straight face. You know?
Dude, it's such a good book. What's it called now? I forget the renamed title.
I didn't even know it, but it's not the only one of her books. Yeah, and it's because I think marketing, at least U.S. marketing, they had no place for her. They didn't know where to put her. I don't think they knew how to market her. I think they especially in the 70s and early 80s wasn't perhaps the most welcoming or female-centric marketing. You know? It was a rough time for fiction, at least.
It was great. Her flatter books are also so good.
I'm just thinking of I love to collect original appearances of my favorite stories. So I really love the Quintana Roo James Tiptree Jr. stories, and one or two of them appeared, I think, in fantasy and science fiction. And dear God, the introductions to those are so cringe. It's unbelievable. It's Tiptree, a real man, writes about the savages in Mexico in this next story. I swear to God, I don't even think I'm far off on the word savages are definitely used, and it's pretty much like an Old Spice, manly man, James Tiptree. not knowing, Tiptree, Alice Sheldon's their secret. It's just so cringe, and the story is just mind-blowingly one of the best spec fic has to offer. But at the time period, there was just such misogyny going on there in the genre at the time.
Yeah. I didn't I don't know. There's so many good writers from that era too. They just went unread for such a long time. I legit found Tanith Lee maybe a few years ago. We discussed one of her stories on Abyss. If you remember that one, Matt.
I don't. What one did we discuss?
It was I forget the name of it, but it was one of her like fairy tale takes because she has a book of like her telling you fairy tale stories.
Those are so good. Oh
yeah,
man,
they're great.
So good. The first one, the first story. Go ahead.
Oh no, you go.
Yeah, the first one I ever read of Tanith Lee was from that collection with Red is Blood, and the story was I believe it was called The Princess and the Pit. I think it was called The Princess and the Pit, and it is just so like it just dove straight on into the notion that like it doesn't end well for women in fairy tales, and Tanith Lee just wrote the most demonic, haunting princess story, and I've just been forever changed.
I remember our story we discussed is in that book. I just forget what story it was. But no, she's a wonderful writer, and to tie everything back.
Woefully underread.
I also found out when I was talking about Vascor, Son of Vascor, that was the U.S. title. It was called Shadowfire in England, and they call it Shadowfire here now. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I mean, that's a more marketable title.
Yeah.
I think it was a second in a trilogy. Maybe it was.
It's a second in a trilogy. Yeah.
Second book. Yeah. Was it part of the birth grave?
Yeah. So Birthgrave is first, and Vascor, Son of Vascor. But you can read Vascor without reading Birthgrave.
Huh.
There's like some small references here and there.
Yeah. Well, cheers to the great Tanith Lee, and cheers to you guys for remembering her, talking about her.
And cheers for you for coming on. And before we dive into media, I just want to say Daniel's novella Serpent Shadows available on Amazon, and it's available in bookstores. It is a great, quick read, and I genuinely fully enjoyed my time with it, and I hope you pick it up, you enjoy it as well. But before we dive into Aickman, we like to go over some media recommendations or maybe trash or rant on some bad media. I was remembering that I saw a Facebook post from Mike back when he was on our podcast, and he was talking about the Dean Koontz Nameless books and that rant he had. And I was just remembering that giant rant, how it was the funniest fucking thing on those podcasts.
Oh my god. So yes, we did get some good Mike rants.
We got a lot of good Mike rants. But I saw a really fucked up movie this week that I tentatively recommend. I recommend it if you're really into grindhouse cinema and you kind of want to see a modern take on a grindhouse movie. But if you don't want to watch a 2.5-hour movie that's super violent and very depressing, you're probably not going to get much out of this movie.
It's 2.5 hours?
It's 2.5 hours.
Oh my god. Okay.
It is called God is a Bullet. And it's based on the Boston Turan novel, which I'm kind of reading. And the best way I could pitch this movie, I wrote an elevator pitch, it's like if Cormac McCarthy wrote Dragged Across Concrete. That's the only way I can describe this movie. But it's pretty much about this guy who's a cop, and a satanic cult breaks into his ex-wife's house, kills his ex-wife, kills her new husband, and kidnaps her daughter. And then he meets a woman who's escaped from this cult, and she helps him kind of get inside to try to save his daughter from what the cult does to the people they abduct. And it is very fucked up. I had to take a cold shower by the time I finished this movie. I had to watch some happy things after before I could go to sleep, just because it was just very, very dark.
I'm sorry, wait a sec. You said you had to take a cold shower? Now, normally we have a certain connotation for cold showers.
We do, but this is just, I felt so unclean after this movie, I needed to.
Okay. I was like, after your whole description, and then you're like, I had to take a cold shower. I was like, what's going on here?
No, I felt so unclean after I needed to cleanse myself.
All right. that makes more sense. All right. Like,
but,
Rich.
No, I'm not that bad, Matt. But the movie's really well made. It's actually directed by the same guy who directed The Notebook.
Which is just insane to think about. Is it filmed like The Notebook, but just really?
I honestly haven't seen The Notebook since I was like a 13-year-old boy. 13-year-old boy trying to get close to a girl I liked. It was one of her favorite movies. That's the last time I saw The Notebook.
I've never seen it. I just assumed it's filmed it like a very soap opera style. And
this is filmed very gritty. The movie also stars. It has the actor who played Jaime Lannister. He's the lead.
Oh wow! Okay.
And he's fantastic. Like he does a really great job. Jamie Foxx has a small role in it too.
Huh.
And Jamie Foxx is also really good. He plays this guy who like tattoos the cult members and stuff like that. And the movie's it's a fucking ride into just absolute darkness and depravity. And it has some of the most like violent things I've seen all year. And that's my main thing I've seen this week because I had school start back up. So I'm busy with getting all my lessons ready for the school year coming up. But Matt, what about you?
So for me, I did finish it, and I had started talking about this last week, but I had to wait till I finished it, which was Hide by Kiersten White. I don't know. Rich, I know you talked a little bit about it, but Daniel, I don't know if you had read this yet.
No, I don't think it. What's it? Hide by?
Yeah, Kiersten White.
What's it about?
So it is the description is basically these 14 people get pulled into this town, told that they're going to be in this pilot program, a pilot of a show that's about a hide and seek competition, and two people are going to get out every day for 7 days. The last person wins a $50,000 prize. So it's set now, modern day, and so like almost all of them are what like an older person assumes millennials are. So they are app makers, they are YouTube pranksters, they are CrossFit instructors, they are like yoga instructor, like, so they're all like kind of broad painted stereotypes of what people think of millennials and content creators. And they all need the money, of course. Our main character, a horrible thing happened to her when she was younger. Her dad went crazy and stabbed and killed her whole family. But she was, of course, a big shocker, she was hiding because they were supposed to play a game of hide. Her dad was like, let's hide and seek. And then he went around and found them and stabbed them all. But she was such a good hider that he couldn't find her. So big shock that she's got to go to a hide and seek competition, but she really needs the money because she's homeless and she needs the money. So, they're in this thing, but it's already really clear something shady's going on behind the scenes. The people that bring them to this small town are acting shady as shit. And they just, it's all unclear what's happening. Anyway, long story short, they're brought to this place and it's an abandoned amusement park, which sounds awesome. You're like, this is a great idea, a weird hide and seek competition. It's a horror book, so something bad's gonna happen, and it's an amusement park. I love this idea. It is not very good, at least in my opinion. Yeah, it skates the line on being like a really good horror story. It just skates that line and focuses a lot on like what you kind of assume when these sort of competition show stories and or movies are. So it's all about the people, which is fine. That's great. It should be about the people. But like it you never see until like the end, and even the end, it's a little not great. You never see actually what like happens. It all happens off page, which again leaves it to your imagination. But like it's done so much that you're like, this feels like somebody who just, and I have never read Kiersten White, so maybe she's written a bunch of horror books and I just don't know it, but it feels like somebody that doesn't normally write horrors, like, I'm going to write horror, but I'm a little too scared to go a step further with certain things. And that's just my taste. I do like splattery stuff, but I also like story too. So like, I want to see the both. And there's plenty of books, a million books out there that do it and do it really well. So it's disappointing that this one didn't do it. And it just falls into all the tropes. There's somebody there who is like, well, I'm going to sabotage everybody else. And so everyone's against this person. And this, so you're like, all right, well, I've seen this before and this isn't new. And I won't give the big reveal away, but the amusement park, like we said last week, is built like a maze. There's a fancy old temple house in the center. There's these weird noises.
What's the name of the company?
Oh, yeah. The name of the country, and I might put emphasis on certain word, is Aickman Free Entertainment, or Aickman Free like sports something or other. So so you have a maze, you have Aickman, you have a temple in the center. It's kind of clear what the story is, and last week when we were talking about this, I didn't give away anything, and Rich gave me the secret, and I was like, okay, I was right on, and it's very,
it's so fucking stupid. I can't.
Yeah, very clear what is happening in here, and like it's even clear outside of this because you start getting pictures of like who's running this and why they're running it, and there's even hints at the very beginning. They're like, oh, this is like a perfect town, this is a good town, everyone here is really good, and we're always safe and all this stuff. So you're like, I wonder what this is. And this thing, again, early in the story, you're like, oh, this happens every 7 years and they have to do 14 people exactly. So you kind of, if you're not reading between the lines, I'm telling you, it's very clear what this whole game is about. And it just, man, I started hate reading it. I do not finish books if I don't like them, but for some reason I was like, I'm just gonna hate read this one all the way through, and was not impressed. Great concept in there. The ending, it does sort of give us something cool, but nothing that we again haven't seen before. I mean, this is all very textbook, nothing very new in here at all. So somebody, I was talking to some people, they kind of compared this to a YA book, and that totally makes sense. This, and again, nothing against YA books, I really like YA books, and if it was marketed
YA book, it's pretty basic.
Yeah, yeah, fair.
Has more depth than this book does.
Yeah. I was like, maybe if I went into that mindset, I would have looked at it a little differently, but it wasn't marketed that way, and it wasn't presented that way. So I kind of was looking at it as not a YA book, but I think
it's also sold with the adult books too. It's not put in the YA section of bookstores.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I found it. And so I don't know. I had really high hopes because I love abandoned amusement parks, and I love the idea of doing competition type shows. But I've seen a lot better. If you want something like this, where a bunch of, and they're not kids, so that's the other thing too, I was gonna say. But if you want more of a people trapped and they have to kind of compete, I mean, just reread or watch Battle Royale again. You'll be much happier.
Royale.
So I think that's like we'll say that's the main thing for me this week.
I will say, before we go to Daniel, I was at my old Barnes & Noble last night before I went to CC's Space Cowboy, and guess what they have now?
Uh-oh, what do they have now?
A graphic novel adaptation of Hyde.
No way. They really did one?
They really did one.
Oh my God. I might have to look and just flip through that.
My boss showed it to me.
I can't imagine it being good. I can't believe they did that, but okay. It feels like one of those things that's going to be a movie and a million people are going to be like, oh, this is the best thing ever. I'm telling you now, it's not.
All right.
They're all lying to you. I'm speaking the truth.
And Daniel, what about you?
Wow, it sounds like they need to put content warning on that book, but only like warning. This is thin, like it's good. It's thin, like. Yeah, it sounds like such a good setup. I'd be disappointed, man. But wow,
it would have been a great novella.
Yeah, maybe. I won't go into such great detail because it just came out. But this week, Changeling, the TV show Changeling by the great Victor LaValle just came out.
I need to see
on
that
Apple
show.
TV.
Is it good?
The first episode dropped. It's great. Oh man, it's just I only watched the first episode and just 2 thumbs up. Just kind of were really great. Just leave it there. In terms of something I'm reading, I would love to mention Kelly Link. Her, I'm going to probably mess up. It's either I think it's White Cat, Black Dog, or vice versa. It's her new collection, but the story is called Skinder's Veil. It also appears in Ellen Datlow's Shirley Jackson themed anthology, Skinder's Veil by Kelly Link. We're talking about Robert Aickman and we're talking about Strange Tales. Vaulted to the top of like my favorite ghost stories, my favorite, what I'll say is a strange tale, Skinder's Veil, Kelly Link. So good. So good.
That's awesome. I did see that just come out. I was really excited about that.
Yeah, no, Kelly Link is fantastic. She's one of my favorites.
Yeah, she's just tops all around.
Oh, should we hop over to the strange tale that is Ringing the Changes?
Let's do it if we dare. Let's hold on. Yeah. Let's make sure our microphones don't collectively.
Oh, my microphone's unplugged. I'm using the laptop mic now because something's on my boot snowball.
Oh, Aickman could haunt your laptop.
Yeah, all of a sudden my laptop just resets because he didn't appreciate the jokes I was making earlier.
Oh my gosh. So why this story?
Is that a question to me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Well, I think Rich and I we wanted to talk about Robert Aickman, and as we were going back and forth, I was like, well, I just talk about the swords way too much. Let's do something different.
And then I was like, what about Ringing the Changes?
Yeah. Yeah, we were throwing them around, and I think we were throwing ideas around. I think we somehow landed. We were talking about. I was telling him that anecdote about Peter Straub, and I was like, hey, like Ringing the Changes is actually Peter Straub's favorite Robert Aickman story. Maybe we should check that one out.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that was his favorite. Huh.
Yeah, or at least it was on the day that we were talking. Like everyone's favorite. And I'm not saying that to be flip about Peter Straub or anyone in general, but right, like our favorites for things we love. Yeah, at least for me, that could be fluid. It's like, oh yeah, like Ringing the Changes, totally into it. And then you could on a different day you could be feeling a different vibe for a different Robert Aickman story. But it is a great story. And it was your first. Yeah. This is your first Robert Aickman read, Matt?
Yes, this is my first one. So I dove right in, and I liked it. It took me like a page to kind of get used to his style. Though, like just those first couple paragraphs, he wrote really. It was different, like just the way he was saying things. But it didn't take that long to get used to it. But I was just like that threw me off at first. I was like, man, he's got a lot of words in here, and the way the words are put, like it felt like a funny order. But anyway, first Aickman story, and I really did like enjoy this. I liked that he went, and we can get more into the story for the listeners, but I do like this went in a completely different way than I thought it would, and it like it just, I was very shocked by that. And I liked it. It was a good shock because it wasn't like a typical thing that we'll say in just a second, but I wasn't expecting that.
I love. Oh, go ahead.
You go, Daniel.
I love that it's your first Robert Aickman story, and I also love your reaction that you kind of moved past it, but I want to bring you back to your reaction. You said, "Oh, I wasn't used to the prose, and I thought there's a lot of words in it, and it took me a while to get used to it." But so I'm like really fascinated. I'm like revisiting the story and revisiting. It's different when you can revisit the story and revisit the entry point. So I just think it's really cool to see your reaction and your initial reaction to that, because like Robert Aickman is writing. For those who haven't read him, I guess he was writing in maybe the 40s, 50s, 60s, even up to the 70s, and he has a very British, male point of view. Maybe skirting the line, like look, I love him, but we can give an asterisk when an asterisk is required. Almost maybe not really overtly misogynistic, but he's an old British chalky white male from a certain time. That being said, he is viewing the world with a certain nostalgia and a certain point of view. So that's really comes across. But that being said, at least to this reader, and when I revisited the prose, I was struck by how lucid and clear it remained. Like for me, I still noticed what you were saying, Matt, but I still felt that the prose was I didn't feel it was wordy. It was loaded. It was loaded. There's a lot of the sentences are doing a lot with a little to me. So I could see it being two sides of the same coin, or a double-edged sword, no pun intended, of being like, you might be taken aback by the prose, or it might be like, wow, this prose is doing a lot.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to the start of the story so I can like pull it out, because it just like
he had never been among those many who deeply disliked church bells, but the ringing that evening at Holofagen changed his view. Bells could certainly get on one's nerves, he felt, although he had just only arrived in the town. The opening line right there.
Yep. Yeah, it was just oh my gosh, where was it? It's just here. Like it would have been impossible for them to have because they had courted from all right, maybe that's not it. It's just like he had like flipped the words, because his business position was less influential than he had led. No, wait, that's not it. I don't know. I should have highlighted it, but like the way, like it was just interesting, and I think you're right. And like I can I forgive that older style just because I know that was the way they were writing, even in the 50s or whenever this was written. And like, reading some of the stuff, like some weird, which I'll get into. This is like the third or fourth story we've discussed that has a thing with dead people that do something we don't expect. But I'll get to that in a second.
Yeah. But it's kind of a trip for our podcast now.
Yeah, I think so. But like having read one of those earlier stories, I was kind of ready for that kind of style. Just like it took me a second where I was like, man, he's sort of doing like a triple negative in a sentence, so like I had to like do the math to figure it out, and I was like, all right, this makes sense. But so I think one of the things that I saw, and this hopefully has an answer, was did they make this maybe not into a movie but into a Twilight Zone episode? Like, was this something that was filmed at some point?
I don't think so, but I could be wrong.
I thought I saw
it feels like it. It has that feel, though, right?
Yeah. No, this would have made a really good Outer Limits or Twilight Zone episode, or like.
Yeah. Because it's like it's a man and an older gentleman and a younger wife who are having a bit of a tense relationship, and they arrive in a strange rural town in Britain. So I almost was getting almost like a Wicker Man vibe, not quite the isolation, but they arrive at the town, and right from the start, what the reader is very quickly introduced to the dynamic of the couple. but they're also introduced to like, this is a weird town, and it doesn't feel like you feel unsettled from the start. Like they're like, hey, where is the bed and breakfast, sir? And they're like, oh, you're going to there? And like, the two people like sort of, you always get the sense that like the townspeople or everyone there knows something that the characters and you, the reader, don't know. And that's immediately unsettling.
Yeah, I thought it was like he did a great job of setting up, even just so they take the train, and like the train just feels empty, and even the station like is described as like, well, like I'm trying to think of the way he put it. He was like a royalty could almost come here or be okay being here or something like that. And
I love that sentence. I love the way he described. I'm not looking at it, but I was re-peeking at the opening last night, and it maybe it's because I was looking for that Aickman nostalgia. It said the train station was like large enough or able to fit a London, like a London stage liner, but those had long since stopped making the trip or something.
Yes.
So the sentences were packed. Like it's not only. So I love sentences like that. Maybe they can be off-putting to some, but I like that sentence immediately was giving me sensory description. It was giving me information about the town, and was also giving me information about the emotion of the narrator and probably Aickman himself. So like sentences like that were just delighting me as I re-glanced at this in preparation for today.
And like there was even one about the two, because like you said, so it's a husband and wife, their honeymoon. They wanted to go somewhere off season, and it's like a 24-year age gap or something like that. It's like a pretty big age gap between them. And she wanted, it's like on the coast, so she's like, oh, I want to go see the sea before we go to the hotel. And like she just takes off running, and like paraphrasing the sentence where he was going to run. He was like, he started running, I think, but he was happy that nobody was at the windows watching him run. And I was like, that's again, like you said, there's a lot in there. It's telling us that this town is empty, and it's telling us like he's feeling the age gap, and seeing his younger wife like running, and he just knows, he's like, I just can't do that. And it's just I think he does a lot of that really well, really giving us a lot to kind of chew on. And once we kind of get into the meat of it, it feels like maybe either I was used to it at that point, or it just he was more focused then on like giving us like, here's what's happening. Because like once I felt like once they were at the little inn thing, it was a little bit, the sentences, it didn't feel like that anymore, at least to me, where it felt like he's like, all right, you got an idea, you know what's happening, you know what the town is, you know what these two are like, let me show you what's happening next. And so like it doesn't shift, so it's not like a jagged shift. It just felt like, okay, he's now focused, this is where we need to really pay attention, which I liked. I thought that was cool. And just again, so for listeners, this couple, they're there, they do go out to the sea, the water's gone, it's just all rocks.
Strange smell that they smell.
Yeah. And
the smell happens a lot. You hear the smell comes up a lot.
The big thing that we haven't mentioned, though, is in the title, and maybe we mentioned a little bit, is there's church bells just ringing nonstop
all over town.
All over town. First, they think it's just one. Then they think it might be two that are and then they figure out like, no, it feels like it's all of them. And I love the description. I can't remember if it was the inn or one of those cops that were like, oh, they're just practicing.
Yeah.
One thing I will say about the story that sticks out to me is like, it just slowly gets more kind of mysterious and sinister the more it goes.
Yeah.
Like, I feel there's a really great gradual tone shift, like as the story goes.
Well
that,
said.
Really
well said.
Yeah, I think that because like we said, the beginning couple pages it's a longer short story.
Yeah.
But he really is just giving you this idea of like what the town is, and it's empty and it's old. They only have one inn, and even the cops are sort of surprised that they rented tonight. And so like all these little things that you're kind of just like, what's happening? And then you actually get to this little inn, and the wife that's running the inn, and she's already drunk. And so she's like just off just a bit, and yeah, it's just this thing. And there's like one other person that stays at the hotel that I can't think of the guy's name is right now, but they're like, oh, he's kind of weird. And they do meet him in the dining room. He's eating in the dark. What's fascinating is how obsessed that guy is with the wife, the young newlywed wife. He just keeps staring at her the whole time. And like I couldn't tell if that was due to the way the story ends, or one of his a little bit earlier story, like one of that guy's stories, the commandant, because he kind of talks about the women at some point. So yeah, he we get this point where we like it, just the bells are ringing nonstop. They can't not hear them. The husband is getting kind of annoyed by it. The younger wife is sort of okay with it. And then we have this dinner, which is fine. And then when the husband wants to get after drinks, that's when we really start getting into like, oh, the wife of the innkeeper, she's just not good. I mean, she's good, but she's scared of her husband. Her husband's very drunk, but she's very like shady about what's going on in town right now. And then that's when the commandant, we get the nice story from the commandant about what's actually happening here.
So I love that you're alluding to an ending, or I also love that you're alluding to what's actually happening here, because I'm like, wow, I actually want to hear your perspective on that, because what I took away from the story was I don't think we ever know what's actually happening here. I mean, we know what we can say. Oh yes, we hear the bells, we see we see certain things happening, but what makes this, I think, a great story, perhaps even great, is great illustration of an Aickman story, is there really isn't it's never definitively given what's happening here. It feels like it feels like it should, and it feels like it's almost. But what I love about it, and what makes it more unsettling, and what makes it Aickman, is it's not quite lining up. Like on the surface, it might be like, yes, there's bells, and because there are all these bells, that's supernatural, and that's causing what you, the reader, are seeing. But that's not quite a given. And it's kind of subverted, and we're also, because we're readers and there's this British style, we also think like, oh, there should be an analogy here. Oh, the bells mean this, and this means this.
Yeah.
But that also doesn't line up. It feels like it's right on the tip of your tongue, or it's right at a grasp, but you're like, oh, and you feel like it's gonna be on the nose. Like, yes, the old man and his young wife, and there are bells, and there's strange things. So it definitely means, what does, you get the sense that there is meaning there, at least for me, that there is meaning, and that there is depth, and there is something profound. But what is that? I can't tell you. And to some people, that will frustrate. If that frustrates you, you're going to hate Robert Aickman, throw that book in there, pick it, and be like, Robert Aickman sucks. If that's the sort of thing that's not your thing, just be. But if that sort of thing delights you and tantalizes you and intrigues you, and you like that stuff, then Robert Aickman will be your great joy.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, like Robert Aickman's pretty much like, he's not going to give you any answers, and it's more kind of you have to deal with be okay not having answers, but also trying to either find or create the answers yourself.
Yeah.
Like interpret
that's
the story
what's beautiful about it. And that's what allows for, I think that's what allows for the magic of resonance. Like, how do you do that? And that's why you're able to come away with whatever feeling you do come away with, like a sense of dread or a sense of creepiness, or something different, like these sentences that, you know, Matt and I, we've been riffing and sort of making fun of him on it, but that's where it's happening. Like, if you're gonna feel something from the story, you're gonna feel something. It's gonna tap into part of you, or not.
Yeah. No, it's
totally.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that, because like because you can't, sometimes you can't help it, especially with something like this where you're trying to think about like what he's doing, and like especially knowing that this was like in the 50s, and this is somebody over in, you know, like in the Britain area. I'm not sure if he's from London or where he's from, but over in that, basically, like, I just kept thinking, I'm like, oh, is this him like processing World War II with like the bells, and like, you know, you think about like alarms and everything, but like, even if you do think that, as you go through the story,
it doesn't quite line up.
Yeah, it doesn't line up. You're like, no, that can't be it.
Right? Like, is this about wedding? Is this about his lost youth? Is this about, you know, male virility? Like, I can't, you know, like, there's all these things are sort of there. And you're sort of expecting it to be like an analogy or a symbol, but it's like, no, it's not. It's not. It's slippery.
Yeah, and like, that's what I think is really great about Aickman, is just
that's why he's number one on this. You know, like the only other person who can, in my humble opinion, the only other person who can write a strange tale like that is Kelly Link. I feel, and I, you know, going back to that Skinder's Veil, Kelly Link is doing the same sort of thing at times.
Yeah.
No, totally.
Yeah. I think it's just, it's so, okay. Well, at this point, we're kind of spoiling this, but this is an old story, so it's okay.
Oh, spoil it, hit it. So give me your take on it, Matt. I'm like dying to hear, like, all right, what is the meat of it? What's the ending? What happens according to you? I'm like, I love it.
Yeah, what's happening?
Hit it.
Well, some of this I feel like is right in the story. My interpretation, I don't know. I honestly have no idea. So our commandant guy, at one point talking to the husband alone, tells us that the bells are to wake up the dead. And I guess, like, in my head, and what we see later is that it is actually the dead. But maybe it's not. Now that we're talking about this, I'm wondering. But anyway, the bells are supposed to ring up the dead, and the dead come to town, and it happens every year. And I think it's supposed to happen the same day every year. But then, like, the innkeeper, at least the wife, like, I guess, messed up because they weren't supposed to rent out any, like, you know, there were supposed to be any outsiders in town when this happens.
Yeah.
And so like so that kind of sets us up. And then, like, the husband kind of thinks it's crazy, but like eventually starts believing it when somebody comes running down the street. And there's more stuff in between this, but like the basic idea is somebody's running down the street, the dead are awake, and then they all sort of appear, and some, like, the townspeople come out to greet them. And then they just want to dance, which I don't know what that means. Like, again, for the listeners, we'll get into some of the other stuff, but the really basic is, like, they hear this chanting, and the husband's like, oh, it's some sort of like weird chant, like prayer hymn thing, and they're blocked the windows and they block the door, but then the dead come into their room and start dancing with the wife, and they're just dancing, and he can hear, and there's like a little poem of like, the dead want to dance with the living, and the living want to dance with the dead. I paraphrasing and guessing at the wording, and that's like literally it. They dance. The wife is taken downstairs, but she's fine because the dead leave, and she like has a split second weird look in her eye, and then that's the end of it. But
so, I want to jump in with you on this.
Yes.
The three things I'm hearing from Matt, and I'm just a guest here, so this is a bold thing to say, but the first thing that comes to my mind is You got to have a regular feature. Matt reviews Robert Aickman. Matt's take on Aickman. It's a new feature of the show. At least one listener is going to be on that. So that's number one. Feature number 2, top 10 most rejected episodes of The Walking Dead. But number 3, I think you did hit it right on the head. Like, yeah, like when Aickman gives you the reveal, you're like, it throws the whole story upside. Like, is this literal? Are they the dead? Are the characters the dead? Right? It starts to think that you start to even question what's literal and what's symbolic, and you can't. You everything's wrong and everything's right. Like if you're like, yeah, it's the dead and the dead started dancing, you're right. Oh, maybe it's like symbolic. Yeah, that's right too. But it can't be. It's just such a weird, surrealistic paradox.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where it's like every idea is a good idea that could work for an interpretation and understanding of it, but then it just never connects.
Yeah. And then, so that's either going to frustrate you, but for me, like, I don't know, to me, it delights me because it doesn't feel haphazard, and it feels like, it does feel organic, and it does feel authentic. To this guy. And everyone's free to reject or accept it as well. But yeah, I get and knowing a little bit about Aickman and where his stories come from, you get the sense that this is almost like a transcription of a dream, or that dream logic, or that nighttime logic, and that is that sort of logic, that sort of Aickman communicating to you in a way that's not consciously processed, is an absolute delight, and why I just get so excited just about hearing Robert Aickman. For me. But I can also see why Matt could just take this book and be like, never again.
Just like Matt, I'm going to read the rest of this collection just because like that one story alone.
I'm totally intrigued. It's just so fascinating.
I am in all the way, but my interpretation's like Matt's. Like I kind of took everything at literal face value. So like I just imagined just the dance party of the dead happening, and it was the best image in my head.
I mean, and it's like there's a lot of things to discuss on that. Like on one level, I think, and you even said it earlier, just about like, this older male, and like about getting older, and like you could interpret it as him seeing, like, I don't know, the death maybe or youth, and like he's never gonna be that dancer, and again, written probably in the 50s, and maybe he was seeing, I don't know enough of that history to say anything, but like seeing this trend of like kids at, I don't know, sock hops dancing, and he's like, oh, I'll never be able to do that, and Aickman's like, I'm gonna write about this. Like, this is his like take on it, or maybe even just a take on this like, uppity kind of crusty London or English person, and seeing that the young are doing things that they don't agree with. But like I keep going back, and like I said, or like we've said, with having done previous stories like this, it's so neat to read these older stories, because you get to a point when you hear the dead are alive, like the dead are coming up. In post Romero, our natural instinct is to think, all right, well, when the dead come up from the grave, their only goal is to eat living people. Every movie with the dead coming back, like I'll say 99.9% of movies with the dead coming back, involve them being zombies. There are ghost stuff too, but that doesn't count. We're going to say just living, like a body digging out. So like reading the one we read, I think 2 weeks ago, with the dead in Brazil, and reading A Beleaguered City from the 1800s, they all do this awesome like thing before that, where the dead are alive, and I guess the dancing, they do care about the living. But for the most part, these stories are like the dead are alive, but they just don't care about the living. They're doing their own thing, and so it's interesting.
Good, I love that.
Yeah, like because
I love that analysis of it.
Yeah, I've talked about Beleaguered City before, but in case you haven't heard this was like a book, like a longer short story that came out in like the 1800s. A female wrote it. It was in Monster She Wrote, and so I picked it up. And the very, very basic concept is the dead come up and they take over a town and kind of kick out all the living, and they're there for like 3 or 4 days, and then there's some sort of truce made and the dead go back. But like they don't need anybody. It's really good, and I was really happy when it's something Oily Fan, Margaret Oily Fan or something like that. And has a bunch of other ones. She had to write it under a male name because of the time, but since then it's come out under her name. And but it's just so fascinating, and like that could be like it's a non-Romero chain of the dead have returned. Then that you've grouped this Aickman story, and so that's super. Yeah, it's super cool. That's a super cool analysis. Yeah. Like we all love Romero and we love that take, but it's a different take. And I also love that you said, we're not so sure that they notice us, and it's not about us. Like the Romero is it's so wonderfully American because it's all about us. You know, woe is us. Yeah. You know, but this is like this is something different. And, you know, you do get the sense that they're here, they're back, maybe, and maybe the townspeople, if the townspeople aren't in on it, maybe the townspeople know what's going on, but if you also get the sense that maybe it's like they've just lived there, so it's like, oh yeah, this is when the migration of birds come this time of year. Yeah. It's here already, Jim? Oh, wow, these poor tourists, they booked a room. Oh, they booked a room tonight. Didn't they know that this is when the dead come back and, you know, do their thing? And it's both mundane and possibly sinister, at the very least, just unknown. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and what's interesting, and I would love either of your opinions on this, just because like you get this, at least from the people at the inn, and like I have a thought on that too, but you know, they're kind of freaked out. You have the wife is drunk, the husband's even more drunk of the innkeeper, but like one thought could just be that they're mad because they booked this room early. The commandant, like we really don't know why he's upset, but he's very upset, and we see him in his room, like on the floor crying or up at the window crying. But it seemed like the rest of the townspeople, like, because they all came out of their houses, or at least it seemed that way from the street. They all came out of their houses to see the dead, and half of them were dressed. Half of them were like in sleep clothes, but I would be interested to know like what your thoughts are on the townspeople. And I did see that message. But for you, Rich, like, was the town okay with the dead? Were they scared? I don't know what your thoughts were on that.
I felt like they were okay with it just because they're kind of used to this thing happening. But I also feel that part of it is the town wants to keep it a secret.
Yeah.
Which is why they don't book hotels. They don't let the outsiders come in. They kind of keep this as a thing to themselves, which could either link to like a town keeping its tradition secret, or could maybe link to maybe there's some sort of negative connotation to this in the town's memory. But we don't really have enough to go either way.
Okay.
But like I kind of see the townspeople being just okay with it. They just want to keep it a secret. They don't want outsiders to know.
Yeah, that's kind of like what I was thinking for that. Like I just assumed, because it just seemed like if half the town was really excited that, maybe not excited is the right word, but were out and about for when the dead were coming out, and because it was described almost not quite as a parade, but like the dead were down the street and all the people were on the sidewalk. I was like just trying to figure out, I'm like, some of these people seem fine with it, the other people don't.
I just feel like at this point they're kind of. It feels like they're just used to it by now.
Yeah.
Isn't that a very human reaction though? It's like almost like a tourist town. Like some people are like into the tourists, or some people are like, this. Like it seems like there wasn't one definitive reaction.
Yeah. So yeah, it was like an interesting kind of thing that they knew, and they were just like, well, it happened, but unfortunately we just have two people here, which like in this day and age just is like a crazy thought to think about, like how many people are around, and like to have a place literally be as empty and with only two outsiders in. I'm like, it's just, I don't know. I don't know how to describe that, but it always like, I think it's just this 70 years and we're overpopulated, but I'm like, is there really a town that's was never going to have outsiders in it at some point?
Yeah.
but I don't know.
I also feel like you go, Matt.
Go ahead. Oh, no. You go ahead.
No, you go. I was just gonna say, like, I also feel like part of me feels like there's kind of like a serious bent around like Aickman and stuff, but I feel like, I don't know, there's a fun, playful aspect in how the story is presented to us as well. That's
yeah. He was so serious, and he's like, oh man, when they start dancing, people are gonna lose their shit.
It's just like, I'm looking at a picture of him, and I'm just like, man, when these bodies start dancing,
people aren't gonna know what to do with themselves.
And I like that you mentioned that, like, we're talking today, it's 2023, and you're saying, yeah, is there a place like that anymore? And I think you may have landed on something, because I think one of the themes, Aickman didn't talk a lot. The other great thing about Aickman, or just such a quirky thing about Aickman, is, it's 2023, we writers and readers, we just talk till the cows come home about our stories and meanings. Aickman never did that, and in fact, he quite flat out refused or clammed up to if you asked him about his stories. But the one thing that he was known for, that he did talk about, was he had a nostalgia for an England that had disappeared, or the England that was disappearing was important to him. So maybe Aickman himself didn't even know the meaning of this, but the sense of something disappearing, or something that maybe doesn't exist or might not exist, certainly might not exist now, is seems pretty relevant in the discussion of it.
Yeah, because it's just interesting, because they even make a point at one point that that the inn, like, that there is a tourist season, but it's only like 2 months long, maybe 2.5, and then the rest of the time it sounds like the town's just empty. So you just get this sense of like nobody coming out to this thing, which makes sense for what happens, but it's just an interesting thing to kind of look at from like a now perspective. Just like I know lots of small towns, but if I go to this small town, it's at least me being there, and I didn't pick, like, it's just one of those things where you're like, I can't imagine an outsider, or like an insider town like that existing, to the point of being able to have something like The Dead come out at one night a year, which I guess is like
sense for.
Yeah,
it makes sense for the time period back then, though.
Yeah,
because we're a lot more connected today than we ever have been.
Yeah, this is true. That would not. Yeah, there would be no way that there wouldn't be a video of it happening today. Yeah. So no, yes, this was a great story. It was just really fascinating, and it's interesting how much you can kind of look at it and just be like, well, what do they do the rest of the time that the dead aren't there? And like, because we even get like that scene where they're burying the dead back, which makes you wonder, like, does the dead just like collapse when it's dawn? And I don't know. There's just so many questions.
It's just so good, though. Like, I'm definitely going to read. Well, I'm going to read more, but this story was just. I honestly loved it.
God, cool. Good to hear.
Yeah.
But Daniel, where can listeners get in touch with you?
You can find me on the Cemetery Dance website. You could find the Serpent Shadow and the Night Marchers and Other Strange Tales up there on the Cemetery Dance website. And also, I have a column called Nighttime Logic, where I like to explore fiction that has that nighttime logic element, and do interviews and talk about stories that have the Aickman element as well up there on Cemetery Dance Online.
That's awesome.
That sounds great. And Matt, what about you?
I am on Twitter or X at Brandenburg DM, and then Blue Sky, just my name, Matt Brandenburg. And yeah, that's it.
And I'm starting to use Blue Sky more, so you can get in touch with me on Blue Sky under my name. And you can also follow Abyss with at Into Staring on X. And this is Richard Gerlach, and as always, keep staring.